back to OnPoint, the podcast where we dive deep into the evolving landscape of medical affairs and explore how strategy, innovation, and collaboration are reshaping the future of our industry. I'm your host, Scott Thompson with Acceleration Point, and today we have a powerhouse episode lined up for you. One that tackles one of the most dynamic shifts happening in our space right now, the evolving relationship between medical affairs and commercial teams. Joining me are two incredible leaders who bring distinct perspectives and deep expertise to this topic. First up, we have Teri and Michelini, the newly appointed Global Head of Scientific Publications and Data Sharing for Sanofi. Well, nearly a decade of experience at Sanofi and an impressive career spanning Baxter, BMS, Shire, Teri brings a wealth of experience in medical communications, oncology, and scientific strategy. Her ability to elevate medical affairs as a strategic partner through transparent and impactful collaboration is something the entire industry can learn from. And joining her today, we have Parker Richardson, Vice President of Omnichannel Strategy and Operations at Astellas Pharma. Parker has led transformational efforts across commercial, digital, content operations at companies like GSK and Moderna. He's a bold thinker. When it comes to customer centricity and enterprise collaboration, his commercial lens is going to really shine a light and drive a lot of fascinating dialogue about his collaboration and relationship with medical affairs. The points of view shared by both my guests represent their own personal points of view based on their whole experience across industry and is not necessarily reflective of the companies they work with. Welcome to OnPoint, the medical excellence podcast where we talk to pharma leaders about how to build highly effective medical affairs organizations. In this episode, we're unpacking the content they presented at the Medical Affairs Professional Society 2025 meeting. It was an insightful session, harmonizing medical and commercial functions without compromising compliance, clarity, or customer impact. From redefining roles and responsibilities to sharing real-world success stories and outlining the mindset that need to change for this future, this conversation will be both strategic and give you practical takeaways. So whether you're in medical, commercial, or somewhere in between, you won't want to miss this. So grab your notebook and let's get on point. In your map session, you started by talking about some of the shifts that are happening and how there were some kind of historic firewalls that really created silos and some redundancies. But we're starting to see a shift in this relationship between medical and commercial. What are you seeing and what's causing it?
As I shared at the MAPS meeting, there's been a long history and medical affairs hasn't been around all that long. It emerged probably in the 1990s, primarily for medical information. And then because of changes with recommendations from OIG and FDA, we saw that there was more influence and need for medical affairs role. And as a result, there was also somewhat misinterpretation of the relationship between medical and commercial. And thus, there are being firewalls put into place to say they have to work separately. And while I do agree that there's independence that has to take place, but I don't think that means that there can't be collaboration. And I will say, I think in most of my career, maybe I was just been lucky and I'd been at companies where there has always been that communication that took place. Now, some of this was kind of just as medical was emerging, but even then, at other companies, there was always kind of meetings that took place that had the voice of both. It wasn't one controlling the other. I do know, however, that there are some companies where the medical and commercial sit in completely separate buildings so that there's no communication that goes on. So I think that, we have to have a good balance, but I think if we aren't talking to each other, there's just redundancies. We don't have the same, for lack of a better term, messages coming across. And so I do think that needs to take place now with the right guardrails.
I'll pick up on one of the points you were making around the fortune you've had to be at places that have encouraged that dialogue. And I would just echo that same sentiment. I have been very fortunate to work at a few companies, but across multiple countries, having lived abroad and work in various cultures. And I started as a sales rep in 2007 and then went through a a handful of different roles. But what strikes me as being common through all of those, all the way back to 2007 and beyond, has been the interest and the intent to improve the working relationship between commercial and medical. And that's coming from me as a commercial guy that, it was really part of the equation that we were supposed to. So on the one hand, the question about, the movement and the shifts, I'd in some ways argue that it's not necessarily new that there's a shift towards that, right? I think the shifts may be more about how do we enable what's happening and how do we get there? And where that comes from, in my opinion, has to do with just the evolution of where we're at in our relationships with industry and professionals. We all know the access stories are what they are, particularly on the sales and commercial side. Sometimes it gets a little bit more tough and restrictive, but I think also as companies who value the time that professional HCPs and their staff and others are willing to provide for us, we're all of the recognition and mindset that there's a limited timeshare available, and we are coming to and at each of these professionals as one company, and that's becoming more and more, in my opinion, just the preeminent paradigm that's really emerging in our industry these days. That it's not, in my case, Astellas Medical or Astellas Commercial or Astellas Market Access. It's just Astellas, and that's how professionals see us, and we need to be smart about how we do that. I mean, to make sure that we value their time and that we're demonstrating that and how we ask for and receive and really respect that from our customer.
15 years ago, my first experience with pharma was at Biogen, and I knew nothing about the industry. And I was interviewing both commercial and medical affairs leaders and asked why are they here? Like, why, why are you even why did you choose to do this? Everybody's really smart. They're scientists. They're professionals in their space. And I heard from both, I want to change patient lives, especially, it was in the MS space, and both teams were just as passionate about that goal. But we have different roles. And, it took me, as most people coming into industry, a little bit of time to learn that. Before we jump into the individual roles and kind of what that value is and how we work together, why do you think we swung so far as an industry towards firewalls and reasons that we can't communicate?
I'll start on this one if that's okay. I think I was having a conversation with some colleagues on a similar topic, and the response came back to me that, in an effort to do something right, but not wanting to make a mistake, we end up doing nothing at all. And we retreat to our corners, and it's out of fear of, what some of those rules are. And that's real, right? I mean, there are actual, regulations and compliance and many things that we do actually have to work with and work through and partner on. And sometimes not having that real proper and thorough understanding of what I can do leads you to just think you can't do anything. And that's probably tying back to the first question. I think that's where the biggest shift is happening, is unlocking that and saying, it's not true that you can't do anything. What is true is that you can do these things. And here's where those lines need to remain. And the clarity in that is unlocking a lot of opportunities for us. But I believe it's those moments where nobody wants to mess up, right? So we all just end up retreating to our own corners. We've got to get beyond that.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I totally agree with what Parker said. But I think it's that fear. Nobody wants to be under a corporate integrity agreement or a CIA. And so that led to a lot of perhaps conservative interpretation of what could and couldn't be. Because we do know, and there are examples of bad practices that took place. And so, which led to the CIAs. And so then, as you noted, the pendulum swung way to the conservative side to say, okay, we can't do these things. And we just need to bring it back. And again, I was talking with somebody else when we were talking about, prior to our session at MAPS and kind of laying out what we were going to do. And compliance needs to be there, and compliance needs to be a guidance, but it's not asking yes or no questions of compliance. It's what's the risk? So, and then accepting that risk, are you going to take the risk or not? And what's being done. But again, I think there tends to be just conservative interpretation on what can be done.
Maybe as a way of people understanding what that means, and that kind of that there's the black, the white, and the gray. Like maybe just to help people understand, both of you shared in your opening that you've been fortunate to work for organizations that have encouraged collaboration, that have encouraged discussion. Parker, maybe you first. Maybe just what does that look like in your organization at Astellas?
Yeah, and I'm happy to share my experiences. Of course, we should add the disclaimer, of course, that it's my experiences and not speaking on behalf of Astellas. And also I'll play with this a bit with some of my previous experiences too. Where I've seen this work best is is going beyond the policy. You know, there's certainly a policy that needs to be very, as you say, black and white and clearly written, well understood, and all of the things that go along with every great SOP and POL that might follow it. The part that comes beyond the policy that is really, I believe, where, let's just say that's where the magic happens in this case, it has a lot to do with change management and working through the people who are then supposed to be interacting with the black and white and inside of those boundaries. And where I've seen this work really well, it involved a number of very open scenario-based dialogues and discussions about what about when this comes up, or what about this situation that I've faced in the past, or that you have faced in the past. Here's where things are okay. Here's where that starts to get out of bounds. And a bit to Teri's last point, here's where that becomes risky. And we need to be really clear about where there's a risk that is needs to be debated and agreed upon, or there's a risk that is just risk we are not willing to take, and put a full stop to that. So I think it's about policy. I think it's about having clear discussions about those gray areas, and then being able to work through in a very, very clear change management approach, and helping people understand what that really looks like and feels like based on real life scenarios.
Teri, what do you see?
I guess the example of where there needs to be the collaboration is developing the scientific platform, or the scientific communication platform, or whatever companies call it. Basically, it's it's kind of like the guidance of how you're going to talk about the product, how you can talk about the mechanism, how you those kind of things. And again, on the medical side, we don't like to use the term messages, but the scientific statements or things like that. But this is something that should be developed in collaboration, not only between medical and commercial, but corporate communications, research, development, everybody that's touching the drug, to be able to have a consistent narrative of how you're describing the product, assuming you're working on one product. But this is where particularly CFB. Then again, as you alluded to, there's different things that medical is going to do and commercial is going to do. But if back to what Parker said earlier, we're seen as one company by the customers. And if we're not consistent in how we're talking about either the company or the product or the disease state, whatever you want to talk about, it's just confusing.
Absolutely.
And that's a great area. I mean, if we just quickly, and you may want to take this a little more in detail later, but the areas where there's just obvious opportunities to collaborate are there, right? It's the scientific communication platform. In commercial, we've always called that like a claims document of some kind. And oftentimes, at least in past years, those things have often never been aligned. And it's a pretty obvious opportunity that they should be within compliant rules and everything else. Other areas of opportunity, are obviously around planning and how, which function and who plans on doing what within a sort of go-to-market strategy, and who plans on engaging. In other areas, then when that gets activated and actually happens, I think most critical in that moment is that the customer knows absolutely who they're talking to, whether that be a commercial or medical person. Then I think getting beyond that and sort of just ending that maybe value chain, who did engage with what customers? Is this data something that your company is willing to share with each function or not? Even that has been a question of
debate,
contention in the past, and I think more recently has been one that certainly has been open for maybe positive interpretation. So there's kind of four really obvious areas that are just very basic almost, right? And having a clear dialogue on those and the ins and outs around each of those scenarios can really help companies and all of us figure out how best we're going to do this together.
Yeah, I think it'd be really helpful to dig into those. And so that value chain started with with really strategy, right? I know we're calling it the scientific platform, scientific narrative, the claims that the commercial side has, and keeping those kind of aligned. Teri, maybe you could start by sharing a little bit about kind of medical's role in that strategy process and what you provide and what you take from commercial in order to form that part of the medical strategy.
The thing I think back to is, again, I think everybody has a voice at the table in setting the strategy. And this is when earlier the better, right? So ahead of launch, people should be aligned, again, aligned on the strategy, but there's things that medical can do prior to launch that commercial cannot. And it does vary by company, but talking about the disease state, getting the data out, right? Having the information out there, talking about the target if it's appropriate. So there is there is that role of medical prior to launch, and then kind of the handoff to commercial to take the data and the approval afterward. So to me, it's not one or the other, but it's kind of like all voices count, and they all should have a share.
Sure. In your session, I think that you described medical's role as delivering independent, credible, scientific-based insights. And yet we're doing that within a commercial organization, right? Like HCPs know we work for a commercial organization. Right? And so, can you just maybe give us some advice on how to stay independent, be credible, bring that to the table in that conversation in a world where sometimes it might not fully align with the aspirations yet of what the commercial goals are of the product or the launch?
It's the, bringing the science, bringing the information, bringing the data to the HCPs. And, in fairness, outside a disease state, it's more reactive than it is proactive that you're able to do, but there should be able to have that scientific exchange, right? So FDA allows for, and that's part of the reason of the separation, is allowing for that scientific exchange. So having those dialogues and being able to answer the questions and provide the information that healthcare professionals will be seeking to understand, what's best for their patients.
Yeah. Before I go to Parker and ask kind of the similar question, I really enjoyed our conversation before MAPS around how sometimes the goals and the mission of medical, while it is not necessarily informed by commercial, it should align, right? And if
Yes.
not, there's a bigger problem than two of us collaborating, right? There's a fundamental issue we won't be able to overcome. And so, the work, as you were saying, pre-launch of who is the right patient? Do people understand the disease? Do they believe that there's a clinical outcome that's better than they're getting today, that there's some other class of treatment or approach to treatment that could lead to that better outcome? Whether you're picking ours or not yet is kind of the next step. But all of that seems like it's like right within medical's wheelhouse and seems like it'd be very valuable to both the HCP and to the organization.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you on that.
Yeah. Parker, how do you see it? So when you're collaborating and you're kind of at this early strategy phase, how do you approach your collaboration with your medical partners on alignment of this kind of core concept?
Well, systematically might be the short answer, the one word answer. I think it's like the elephant, right? You can't eat the elephant in one bite. So how do you tackle this thing? And companies all do it in different ways. And I've been part of a few that have similar styles, but all very different, where there's a point in time that where, commercial colleagues join the sort of path towards commercializing a product. And, I think nobody's hiding behind the fact also that, drug discovery and product development and all of that comes from a medical background. Like it's just the reality of it. And at some point, to your point earlier, the whole goal here is to get that product on the market and commercialize it and make it something that can help fund continued research and other products to market and things like that, but primarily to help those patients who really need that product the most. So in a lot of ways, it's a bit of baton passing where, commercial can help join the party and, so to speak, begin to come into what's going on with the disease state, the product. How might we help bring that to market? How might we help engage in the conversations that are out there? And if I tie a few of your questions back together so far in this podcast, I would almost say that, our industry is a lot more maybe respectful now of how we're approaching all of that. Whereas if you look back, pick a time period, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, and it was the army approach to just repeating a message 7 times and so on and so on, and all those things that were just a bit more equation-like or mathematical, and just if we do this, it will work. That's not where we are today. There's a much more, whether we're commercial or medical, there's much more of an intent and a focus on having a proper engagement and a proper dialogue about what the disease state is, what's happening in that moment, what the problem the patient is facing, the potential solution any one of our products may offer, making sure that potential solution is put into the hands of the right patients is a massive part of our world today. We in no way want to make sure that those products are going to the wrong patient, because that doesn't help any of us. So I'd say overall, it's just a lot more respectful in the approach and proper in trying to make sure that we're all doing this the right way. And so that medical commercial collaboration becomes something that this doesn't happen successfully without it. There is a method and a rhyme and reason to why and how our medical colleagues approach customers. And there's a method and a rhyme and reason to how commercial colleagues approach customers. And ultimately, it's all for the same really goal of ensuring that those customers know about this product and this disease state and who the right patient is for that medicine.
Yeah.
I love that. Go ahead, Teri.
All for the benefit of the patient, ultimately.
Yeah. So something I heard in there is that, there's sometimes this bridge that has to be built between product messaging and the unmet clinical needs that medical focuses on. And in theory, those two should really line up. Can you give us some very practical advice about where that conversation can take place, right? Like who can get in a room and talk about that, and at what level of detail, so that it is collaborative and not crossing a line.
Yeah, I'm happy to start here and would love your thoughts on this one, Teri. I think this, again, is probably something defined by the different companies and their policies, first and foremost. Yeah. And then also structure and how they structure teams. So, for example, brand teams, while sometimes that word brand may feel commercial, sometimes these teams are product teams or something else. They're typically function agnostic because they contain all the functions at some point in the development of a product. And so getting inside of a room and talking together is very natural, usually very encouraged, especially at a certain point at which it looks like a product may be heading towards commercialization. And that collaboration in that moment is really critical in shaping the path that product takes. Usually it's commercial colleagues trying to understand some of the dialogue and the discussion that the medical colleagues have had, just as a way to sort of get caught up on where we're at and what's happening. And in my experiences at multiple places, those have all been very compliant discussions and conversations that it's not about trying to find some ulterior motive or anything like that. It's really trying to understand how are physicians responding to what this product may be offering. Help us understand what patients are going through. You have that background as a practicing medical related type of function. Help a commercial person, help us understand that in a way that I can translate that into what I do, which may sound or be slightly different, but is still with that same goal in mind. So I think it's a very natural thing. Maybe just to go back to the question, I think it's usually structural in the company's approach, and is typically time bound at the point at which a product may be looking towards making it to the market. Now, Teri, what do you think?
I agree 100%, Parker, with what you said. Obviously, again, depends on the company and policies and things like that. But I think everybody coming to the table. So beyond just medical and commercial, you've got development, you've got.
Exactly.
I'm not going to name all the functions because we hear, it'd be a
All
very
day.
long podcast to name all the functions. But they're all sitting around the table, having that strategy talk, discussing about that patient and, what makes sense, what doesn't. Where the difference takes place is the execution, right? In that strategy.
Absolutely.
So there's things that medical can do and the conversations medical can have that's different than what commercial can do. But it doesn't mean that you can't talk to each other, that you can't have that strategy. You can't have even the development of some of the what you're going to use. It's just how you use it and when makes a difference.
Got it. So how does this then cascade down beyond strategy, right? So it's one thing for leaders of an organization to get together and say, hey, what are we hearing generally about what HCPs are saying and what can we do about it, and put together plans. But then when we get down to a rep and an MSL as an example, talking about one particular physician and where they are in their understanding and their progress, like where does that start to run into more challenges?
I will again go back to every company's a little bit different in who's allowed to be in the room with the HCP at what time and things like that. And um, as I alluded to before, a lot of what the medical side, those conversations tend to be reactive, right? So if there's proactive discussions, it pretty much has to be aligned with the label. And again, companies are different even on that aspect, but it's the scientific exchange that we're talking about that's there, and so it's those discussions that take place. I'm not going to talk about what a rep does because there have been one, never.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and yeah, I'll pick that up, and I won't try to talk about what an MSL does at all. But look, I think it's very black and white for a commercial person engaging with a physician. If it's not in the prescribing information, it is not something that is able to be talked about. That's just a generic sort of statement about the way our industry approaches this. And where that becomes a challenge is as we've shifted in pharma and sort of over the years gone from, treating things like blood pressure that affect the masses to now these days, a lot of the products we're talking about now have much smaller patient populations and are much more specific. That starts to present a very different challenge where we have sales reps, of which I was one, and I worked in a specialty area as well, where in some ways you may think that's limited, right? Or the physician may think that's limited. And that may be true for some physicians. It's probably not true for all of them. Because the honest reality too is there's a lot of information out there, and we all know how busy we all are in our own personal lives. And I know physicians, you all have, if you're listening, I know you have personal lives too. So how in the world do you keep up with all of this stuff? Right. So we do need, you still have the necessity for that commercial function and for that sales rep to be out there talking about what's the disease state we're talking about and how does this product help a patient that is going through those challenges. As that conversation begins to go beyond either what's in the prescribing information or certain questions come up that are sort of outside of that space, black and white, that's it, right? The sales rep in that position is done. And at that point, it's about figuring out how to appropriately hand that over or figuring out the right way to solve that. And that's where I was saying a bit earlier, that the best thing we can do as we begin to work closer together is when we are with our customers, make sure they know who they're talking to. I, as a salesperson or a commercial person, want to make no pretense that I'm able to have any discussion that I would expect my medical colleague to be able to have. But I can absolutely respectfully, reactively ensure that this physician gets connected to my medical colleague who can then handle their answers appropriately with their training. So those things are becoming more and more clear. And we're certainly facing more challenges, as your question asked, as we go through the evolution of pharma today. But but there's also opportunity to continue to clarify that and work more closely together because of that.
So one of the forcing factors I'm seeing drive this clarity is automation, omnichannel, next best action. Anytime that we need to tell a computer to do this in this sequence for this person, we have to be a lot clearer than saying, here's some general principles, be safe, right? And so now, we're all being challenged to say, hey, if a HCP doesn't care about this particular clinical outcome yet, maybe they shouldn't be seen by the rep. They should be seen by medical, because they're not going to care about a product if they don't care about this outcome that it drives, versus, hey, I've checked off that they understand the data, they understand the mechanisms of action. Hey, guess what? They're ready to be engaged. Like, even that some companies are struggling to say, but that's what these tools are designed to do. Have you been involved in like trying to get to rules that you can actually put in a computer that are that black and white?
Yes, and I love this space, and I'm really excited by it. That's why I probably lit up when you asked the question. But I think it is so cool to try to figure out how you activate this and operationalize something like this at scale, because it's actually the hardest part may not be that rule you're talking about. The hardest part may be the data. And how do we put it in a way that a machine can interpret that data and then use that? And yes, of course, AI and unstructured data is maybe a little bit easier to work with these days, but to think about, okay, this one specific doctor for this disease state in this community related to this product knows this or doesn't know this, like how do I put that in a structured data type of way that I can then action it? And oftentimes that may look like something a little bit different. It may look like a trigger based upon having seen some content that's more of like a prelude, that to your point that you just made. I saw this, and so now I'm ready for the next thing. And what we want the machines to do, if I can say it that way, of course, human in the loop. What we want the machines to do is to be able to assess and consume and then provide an output from that data in a way and at a scale at which we humans couldn't at some point without many hours of work going on with multiple people. The other challenge to that, though, that we are facing is, of course, the trust and who owns that relationship, and how do we protect it from not going all out. But over time, we'll learn more and more from this. But I do think the automation part of this is fascinating, especially based on how a physician or interested party responds to and engages with existing content that is available. But it's a fun topic to talk about.
It is. And Teri, I know that in your world, you kind of started, and I think most should, right, when you're doing automation just within medical, right, even between home office and MSLs. And but have you had the chance to start going beyond that and say, like, what is the whole journey for a HCP as it crosses back and forth between these teams, and writing it down?
I personally haven't been involved in omnichannel discussions, but I've been very vocal in the fact that these should not be done in silos. There should be, again, that collaboration. I think Parker stated it very well. And I think also in talking with some of my colleagues, this is actually a way that can help with making sure we're being compliant, and that maybe there is direction on when is the right time, kind of as Parker's already noted. But like I said, personally, I don't have a whole lot to add to it because I've not been involved with those developments, discussions, things like that. But I have been very vocal that these cannot be separate. It has to be a unified approach here.
Something I can add is, it's also not easy. And getting to the place where we're at, kind of the frontier of all of this today, goes back even for me a couple of companies ago, where the idea was, how and should we, and if we do, how could we move to a journey that obviously gets away from the annual planning cycle that we all have. Nobody actually takes a consumer-based or an information-based journey in an annual cycle. We only do it because that's the way our either incentive schemes are, or
budget.
company is based, or whatever else. So we have to get away from this idea that things happen annually, because they just don't. Yet the other part of that is, as we do get away from that, how do we actually break that journey down into micro segments of the journey? So it's a little insulting to think that I should plan on taking you from completely unaware to 100% fully engaged and the entire steps across that journey. And I can sit down and I can plan that in a week, and then we're going to execute that this year. Like, that's just, it's just a little insulting. So how do we, in a respectful way, think about breaking that down into parts? And if you think of those, what do you call them, micro journeys or something else? This is probably also how we're managed as consumers of anything we're purchasing. And while we don't want to become the insert spam email you got this morning from the 10 companies that you don't want to receive, we certainly don't want to do that. We do want to think about engaging customers in bite-sized chunks. And so if I think I would like you to become aware of whatever, this new indication we have, right? So I'm going to try to orchestrate a 3 or 4 or maybe 5-step journey that takes you from completely unaware to just fully aware before we even talk about some kind of trial effort of some kind. So I would like to design that. And for a scale base of customers, if we can get, many of them through there, we know we're moving through that sort of funnel that we all go through as humans. And the part of this is also knowing that not everybody that begins that journey is going to make all of that journey either. So what do we do as maybe they, let's say, exit that journey? Where does it go from there? And how do I orchestrate sort of back on, or what happens next? So there's so many. Marketing becomes, I'll come back on the marketing word in just a minute. Marketing becomes much more complex when you begin to look at it like this. So it does also require a development side to all of us as engagement planners and how we figure we're going to do this. Now, let me just circle back to marketing, and then I'll pause here. But I mentioned marketing, and I mean that almost generically in the sense of all of us working about how we engage with our customers in an appropriate way. And while most of those journeys would obviously be proactive, so therefore a little bit more commercial, to Teri's point, that doesn't happen in an isolated setting without partners around the table to make sure that that's effective and that everybody understands what we're trying to achieve, so that when those reactive things do come up, it's not completely blindsiding other functions. And I think that's where this sort of magic in the room can be unlocked and start to make some happen.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. I had somebody on the podcast named Justin who had the title for a little while of Medical Affairs Marketing Manager. Okay, that's confusing. But essentially it was medical affairs has all of this content and portals and has all of these booths and events that they're trying to educate through, and webinars that they were providing, and people didn't know they existed. They didn't know that those opportunities were there. So what tool do you use to make people aware of something they're not aware of? Marketing, right? And it does seem like that through collaboration, there's some complementary skill sets that we could really, get better at. You could incorporate so much more of that medical perspective into the micro journeys and provide so much support and skill around how do we get people aware of everything that medical has to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd argue too that even omnichannel, you mentioned, we think of it as a commercial thing. I would think most people react to that as a commercial thing, but I would actually argue that omnichannel is not function. Omnichannel is a functional agnostic term. And if you are listening to this and you're in a pharma company and that's not the way you or your team are working on it right now, I'd encourage you to have that dialogue about, how do we make it not omnichannel for commercial, but omnichannel for the brand as a product, as a solution, not as a commercial entity.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. Yeah.
So can you maybe give us a little case study, like a real concrete example, right? Like if somebody's sitting there going, my company would never put medical and commercial in the same room and say, let's plan a journey for HCPs, for a segment of HCPs together. What could good look like? Just what's a micro example?
Happy to give an example. I'd probably say you need a little bit of elements around you to make that happen. And so let me start there first, and then we'll come to maybe the example. And this we did talk about at MAPS for just a minute. So I would say if this is something you're not doing and you're interested in doing, and you want to really try to move this in your company, you need a couple of things around you to really help make this go right. The first is your policy. You need to understand the position of your policy and how it's perceived in the company and what you're sort of up against based upon that policy. So if it feels restrictive, you've probably got a pretty uphill battle ahead of you. If it doesn't feel restrictive, or if it feels like, hey, I see an opportunity based on what the policy shows us, then check, you've got a good opportunity to go to the next step, which would be, you need to make sure you've got leadership support. If you don't have that already and it's not visual, or you don't see it, or it's not on display and leaders aren't role modeling, find you a mentor, find you somebody you can lean into and ask them to support the effort. And that's not just a good pat on the back for what you're doing. That is a out front, making room for it, putting the elbows out into the space and helping you move in ways that you need to move. And then the third piece is you need to have some people behind you who are going to help make some of that energy come to life as well. So who's a bit in your boat, if I can use that analogy? Who do you have with you? Who's going to support you? Can you rally your own product team to be a proof of concept, an MVP, whatever term you use in your company? Can you have some people who are going to go to bat with you and for you if you can put these other things in place? And if you've got that sort of atmosphere around you that's kind of ripe for some of that, then I think you stand a really good chance at being able to then get in a room and knock some of those things out and talk about it. Without that, I think you've got a really a harder hill to climb. It's not necessarily not insurmountable, but I might focus on the environment a little bit before you really jump in with both feet.
Sure. And Teri, maybe as you think about what Parker just said, right, organizational resistance, legacy mindsets, misalignment across leaders, what are some ways that you can address that part of it if you don't see that on display?
Outside of what Parker said, I can't think of any other way you can do that. I mean, you've kind of got to find the champions. You've got to find the people who are willing, as leaders, to help develop this. Outside of that, I don't know how else you can attack it, because you'd be, if you're trying to do it alone, you'd be trying to, row upstream, and it's not going to work.
Is that called mono-channel?
Mono-channel?
Well,
mono effort or something?
You said something earlier regarding conversations with compliance and legal as an example, around separating, I'll expand on it a little bit, separating the objective or what you think is the right thing to get done from how do we get there, right? And asking, like, how could we make this work? Well, how can this work versus can we, right? You said don't ask the yes, no question. And it seems like we have to get agreement on the desire.
I mean, yeah, you're going to need the agreement on the desire. Totally agree. And I think more what I was getting at is that, don't ask, and compliance doesn't want to be asked the yes, no questions either. From my conversations that I've had with them, it's not the situation they want to be in. They want to be partners. And so they want to find a way you can get it done. But again, it goes back to what's the risk? If there's something that you're trying to do, then, what is the risk in what you're proposing? And then the buy-in, and then you take that to leadership and say, are we willing to accept this risk? Whatever it might be.
What does the role of trust, trusting your team, trusting your organization, play in your ability to assess risk and your ability to take risk? And how do you build that trust?
It feels like almost like a loaded question. Like trust is important, right? You need that trust in order to do it. And I have been at companies, I'm not going to name names, but I have been at companies where the message was basically like, it's okay to fail. Because that's how we learn, or that's how we figure it out, type of thing. So kind of going back to what Parker was saying about the inactivity, right? So don't be inactive for fear of that failure, but potentially do something. If you fail, figure it out. Hopefully you don't get in trouble with the failure. But again, figuring out what the risks are before you go too far along the way, and getting the trust and the buy-in from the team members, management,
Sure,
etc.
Yeah, I'd say trust is a human emotion and element of it for sure. So on a human level, you have to have it. I might translate that into corporate speak as accountability, in the sense that I trust you're going to do it. And actually what I mean is you're accountable to do this properly, right? Like the minute you don't do that the way that the SOP says, or the POL says, or anything like that, you're accountable for what happens there. And so sure, I'll trust you, especially as we begin to revise things, or if you decide there's a risk you're willing to accept or whatever else. Trust plays a key component there. But I'd argue accountability is probably the corporate translation of that.
Sure.
I'd say where trust comes into a little bit more of the driver's seat is in a lot of times execution, which still has accountability, of course. But as you think about home office, marketing and medical affairs, field sales, field MSL, now you start to get into, look, you were talking about that HCP as a target or a segment or something like that. And in generality, now you're talking about my HCP, who I call on and who I go see on Tuesdays at this clinic. That's a very different level of trust in the sense of, I don't want you doing things from that home office and having, causing me more harm or trouble in how I need to engage with this physician. And so that dynamic is real in overcoming some of the things that we are doing as we begin to work more closely together.
So I think that goes back to something that you had said earlier around one of these shifts being who still owns the relationships. And if we're looking at more collaboration where there's more than one owner of a relationship, I think you guys talk about a movement from ownership to orchestration. And how does that happen? How does that shift go from this is my HCP, this is my account, this is my KOL, to this is ours, and we're going to coordinate a shared objective, a shared goal around this?
Let me say first, if there's an HCP listening and you're triggered by some of this language, I apologize. It's all meant respectfully. It's not.
It is.
It's not possessive. It's not as possessive as it sounds.
Well, they love the relationship, right? They
absolutely
value it so much, and they want to protect it.
I know, and I was in that same seat, and I know, and what's funny, I thought about at the time back in 07, 08, 09, and all of those years. It's we think about these physicians far more than these physicians think about us, and we're interested in how what they understand and how can I really get to know them better and those types of things. So I just want to say it's striking me as disrespectful, but it's certainly meant fully as respectful and all of that. So, I think I forgot the question, but I just want to make sure.
It's how do we move to a shared relationship, where we're all working together towards something versus I own this relationship and I need to protect it.
Well, I think you've said it, Scott. It's like we're all working together. So it's not to say it devalues the relationship just because the HCP might have a relationship with the other representative, MSL versus representative. But it's that collaboration and working together.
If you have the rights, you could play that song from High School Musical. We're all in this together, because I think you're right. It is that, and I think there's probably a range of collaboration or partnerships or territory groups or whatever you call them in your companies out there, where there's various field salespeople, various field medical people who call on the same folks, and the great ones will understand that they all have their own relationship with that customer, and each of them is purposeful. I would imagine on the flip side, where those groupings and pairings are not great, it's because one of them thinks it's their relationship that somebody else is stepping on, and that kind of stuff. So there's probably a bit of a maturity piece to that too, that you just look for those folks to really understand. And I'll just add that when you start to add in those field-based folks and their relationship with the home office, who wants to now really move to that word you said, orchestration, which takes some of the action away from the field, at least by nature, then it becomes where communication has to be paramount in that. And so there's ways where technology these days, both in CRM solutions and otherwise, you can visualize journey-based operations and how the field-based teams fit into that, and not, because that's really where I would say those opportunities are for potholes to pop up, where communications fall apart and fingers start pointing and those types of things. So communication is ultimately the paramount thing here, but everybody is working on it together, and understanding that is kind of the first step to making this a success.
If somebody is just starting on this journey, right, they have a very, very strong firewall, and they're interested in creating more of a glass wall where you can kind of have transparency and see what each other and work together, but you still have separation. What advice do you have for leaders to take a first step? Like, what's the first thing to do?
In my opinion, you have to be really careful, because what's the old phrase? Ask for forgiveness later, in this case, doesn't work. This is not one of those situations. This is that stakes are too high to just do things and then try to ask for forgiveness later. So I think you need to be really thoughtful. Based on the situation I described earlier, I think you'd want, if you're a leader, what tends to work well in pharma is benchmarking. And nobody loves to be told that they're behind their neighbor down the road or anything like that, right? So, use, whether it's this podcast or other data that's out there. And again, my commentary, and I know Teri's is general and our own views, but use benchmarking that's out there to talk about how the industry is shifting, and apply that to your group as to say, where are we? Take that data, take what you're able to find in benchmarkings, and have a conversation with somebody who you think you could utilize as an advocate of that. And as you begin to grow multiple advocates, I would seek to expand that across multiple functions. And if the first person you seek to have an advocate says, no way, I'm not touching that, it's totally fine to go to somebody else and say, hey, what do you think about this? And try to find, if you feel this is the right thing to do and you're behind from a benchmark, find the people who will advocate for this. Try to use that advocacy group as a way to influence policy and other leadership views, and work it that way, because that will be much more, let's say, risk-free or much more compliant to work through the policy view rather than around the policy, which is obviously the hot water, and we 100% do not recommend. Teri, what do you think? Is there something else you do to overcome that?
And again, I also want to add that my opinion, not the opinion of the company I work for, but I think I 100% agree with what Parker said. And I think the only other thing is partner with compliance, or whatever you call that group. Because 100% agree with the advocate, but again, have those discussions with compliance and say, what is it we can do? How can we achieve this? Whatever you're setting out to do. And maybe it's baby steps to begin with. Maybe it is just as simple as working together on that scientific platform.
Right.
Because that, to me, is low-hanging fruit. It's something that's easy. It should be done. All it's saying is that this is how we're going to talk about the disease state, the product, things like that, and alignment from that. That to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but that to me is something relatively simple and easy to do.
Yeah.
You start with that and maybe build up from that. But again, I think partnering with your compliance, with your advocates, and maybe it's, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's as simple as like talking, if you're in commercial, talk to somebody in medical. If you're in medical, talk to somebody in commercial to say, how can we work together to make this happen? Partner.
Yeah, Teri, I love that. I think that sometimes if we can just say, hey, like, it's a very different ask to say, hey, is it okay if we bring together some medical and commercial folks to talk about our narrative, and we just want to make sure we're aligned, is a very different ask of a leader of a compliance team than we want to build radical collaboration across commercial and medical and do everything, right? It's just such more of a concrete ask, right? And then you could have a second one, which is like, hey, medical has this education that we want to provide, and we think that people who get through it, it would be interesting for our sales reps to be aware that they've done that. Is that okay, right? And you just do one little. Eventually, you've done enough one things that it becomes kind of the way you work, right?
Yeah, it's a great suggestion. And just picking up on the ask part you mentioned, maybe if somebody said no, maybe you asked wrong, right? Like maybe your ask was too radical, to your point. Maybe it's something else. And if you ask about, can we collaborate, the next question probably is, for what?
Yeah.
Is it to go make joint calls? No, of course not. Is it to just talking about messaging and make sure that what commercial is saying aligns with how medical did the scientific so maybe clarifying that ask is a big one, but I love the partner with ethics and compliance, whatever your team calls it. I love it. It's a great team.
Excellent. Last question for each of you. So over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to continue to see this evolution, and it's going to be continued to be fueled by technology that's going to require more clarity, or else it won't work. It's going to be, I think that we alluded to, it's going to be required by HCPs who are going to need more clarity. I'm like, who are all these people I'm meeting with, and how do you all work together? Right? There's going to be more and more demand for this collaboration. What are each of you working on personally to become and stay the leader you need to be in order to lead those efforts in the future? Teri, do you want to go first? Like, what are you focused on for you? What are you trying to develop and learn?
That's a really good question. And again, being in a new role, there's so many things I'm learning right now. That understanding of the business acumen, the business side of things, and having that understanding. I think I have it to a degree, but developing that, I think, is something that I'll be working on.
Love that. Parker, how about you?
I had the pleasure and honor of attending MAPS for the first time this year, and I have to say it was eye-opening. I was impressed with the independent group that MAPS is, which I think in the back of my mind, of course, I knew that they were, but it just became so obvious that the function of this group and how they put perspectives out there and what sort of medical affairs and the medical group as a whole should be doing and how they approach it. And so there is for somebody who's been broadly commercial my entire career, including before Pharma, I have so much to learn. And I've worked alongside medical, and I feel like I've got a ton to learn. So I'm excited to kind of explore more about what MAPS offers and represents and has. And I've been talking to a few of my most immediate colleagues already about, hey, is there stuff in there I need to be really doubling down on already? So I think that's one. And relatedly, it's just about as me and my teams, as we work more closely with our medical affairs colleagues, we obviously can bring the things that we have to offer. That's low hanging fruit. Here's this. What we don't have off the bat is, and how does this apply in your? And so we're going to be better partners for them when we understand that, and closing that gap as fast as possible is really job number one for the next few months. So I'd say that's a couple things, both for me and then both for my team.
Love it. Well, Teri, Parker, thank you so much for joining us. I think the medical teams that listen to this will get a lot out of this conversation. I think that what I heard is it starts with a mindset and a belief that collaboration is important, and there's lots of reasons for it. I think that we heard that we need to take first steps and bring our compliance and our legal partners along with us, and really focus on the outcome and then work together to find the way. That we're going to demand more clarity as an organization, or else all these technology advancements just won't work. And that it really leads to better outcomes for the HCPs we get to engage with and for their patients. And so it seems like a very worthy effort to continue moving towards. So thank you both very much for joining, and I wish you the best. And is it okay if I put your LinkedIn information in the show notes, so if people have questions, they can reach you?
Yep, absolutely.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you again.